What happens when a street gang picks the wrong target in Barron Trump? A night of tension becomes an unforgettable lesson in resilience. Before we dive in, kindly hit that subscribe button and let us know where you're watching from in the comments. Late evening had settled over a remote Texas highway, a place Barron Trump chose to find solitude away from the constant buzz of city life. He yearned for a moment to breathe, yet fate had something far more dramatic in store. Barron's SUV cruised along the endless stretch of asphalt, headlights piercing the darkness that seemed to go on forever. The isolation he'd sought was both liberating and unsettling, a reminder of just how vast and unforgiving the Texas plains could be. Every so often he'd glance at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the familiar flashing lights of some trailing paparazzi, but there was no one. His phone had lost service miles back, leaving him with only music and the steady hum of the engine for company. Despite the loneliness, Barron relished the break from public scrutiny and constant cameras. Out here, he could simply exist in the stillness of the open road. He was dressed simply, in a casual t-shirt and worn jeans, his hair slightly disheveled from hours of driving. This was the rare moment when he didn't have to consider appearances or press coverage. The only urgency in his thoughts was finding a place to rest for the night. He spotted a flicker of neon in the distance, a diner sign perhaps, and decided he could use some coffee to stay awake. His stomach rumbled, and he realized he hadn't eaten since midday. The sign read Maria's Truck Stop, its red letters half burnt out but still glowing defiantly. Barron pulled into the dusty lot, gravel crunching beneath his tires. Only a couple of trucks and an old sedan were parked outside, yet a strange tension hung in the air. He couldn't pinpoint what it was, maybe just the sharp contrast between the warm light of the diner and the pitch-black night. Stepping out of the SUV, he inhaled the crisp desert air. A gust of wind carried the distant scent of sagebrush and a hint of something else, maybe cigarette smoke. Inside, the diner was dimly lit, a single waitress hustling behind the counter. A lone trucker sipped coffee at one end, hat pulled low, while an older couple huddled over plates of pie in a corner booth. Barron took a seat near the window, grateful for a moment's respite. The waitress approached, offering a polite smile. "Long night?" she asked, pen hovering over her notepad. Barron nodded. "Could say that. Coffee would be great, and maybe a burger if the grill's still on." She jotted down his order, then disappeared into the kitchen, leaving him to observe the small-town reality that was so unlike his usual life. He gazed outside, seeing nothing but his own reflection and the glow of the diner's fluorescent bulbs. Then, movement. A rusted truck swung into the parking lot. Its headlights cut across the window, momentarily blinding Barron. As his eyes readjusted, he noticed a group of young men step out, their postures rigid with a certain swagger. They wore matching bandanas or caps, dark jackets with stylized patches on the back, something that hinted at belonging to a local street gang. Barron's gaze narrowed. He wasn't looking for trouble, but his instincts prickled with the possibility that trouble might find him anyway. The men entered the diner, heads turning sharply in Barron's direction. He caught snippets of conversation, low chuckles, short phrases in hushed tones. One of them, a lanky figure with a shaved head, slid into the booth behind Barron. Another, with a chain dangling from his belt, tossed a glance at Barron that felt like a warning. Barron, fighting a flare of adrenaline, kept his expression neutral and waited for his coffee, resisting the urge to show any unease. Their voices grew louder, the clang of metal bracelets on the table a deliberate attempt to command attention. The older couple in the corner looked up nervously, then tried to finish their pie in haste. The lone trucker, seemingly familiar with the tension, quietly asked for his tab and slid out of the diner, leaving Barron essentially alone with the new arrivals. Through the corner of his eye, Barron saw the group exchange meaningful looks, like they were hunting for some excitement in this otherwise sleepy establishment. Finally, the tallest of them, dark stubble on his chin, eyes cold as steel, stood up and walked toward Barron. He wore a hooded sweatshirt with the sleeves ripped off, revealing tattooed forearms. He stopped just behind Barron's seat. "You from around here?" the man asked, his tone bordering on confrontation. Barron turned slightly. "Just passing through," he answered calmly. The man smirked. "Figured. You don't really look like the local type." A hush fell over the diner. The waitress clutched the coffee pot, uncertain whether to intervene or retreat to the kitchen. Barron thanked her with a nod as she quietly placed the mug in front of him. He took a slow sip, meeting the man's gaze without blinking. "I won't be in your way for long," Barron said, his voice measured. Yet the man laughed, a short, harsh bark. "Maybe we want you in our way," he replied. "You see, we run things around here, Outsiders got to pay a little toll for passing through. A flicker of annoyance crossed Barron's features, but he held his composure. Part of him wanted to diffuse the tension, but another part bristled at the idea of paying or bowing to intimidation. He placed the coffee down and turned fully to face the man. "I'm not looking for any trouble," Barron said, "but I don't pay tolls unless it's a legitimate toll booth." A ripple of amusement and hostility flickered through the group. One of them, leaning against the jukebox, crossed his arms and exhaled sharply. Another tapped a foot on the diner's linoleum floor, impatience humming like a live wire. The waitress vanished into the back, as though sensing an unavoidable confrontation. Barron's calm response hadn't de-escalated the situation. It only seemed to fuel their desire for a showdown. The man with the shaved head jerked a thumb toward the parking lot. "Check out what he's driving." Another voice. "Nice ride for a lonely traveler." Barron stiffened, but remained outwardly composed. He could almost feel them sizing him up, trying to figure out what kind of easy pickings he might be. Their expressions ranged from predatory to curious, as though they couldn't decide if he was a golden opportunity or a potential threat. "Why don't you come outside?" the tall one suggested, his voice more of a command than a request. "We can talk about that toll." Barron glanced around, weighing his options. He was outnumbered. The trucker who might have been an ally was gone, and the older couple were clearly in no position to intervene. Barron took one last sip of coffee, set down a few bills for the waitress, and stood. He looked at the men, noticing the tension in their shoulders, the slight shift of their weight that spoke of practiced violence. They thought they had him cornered, that he was just another privileged traveler ripe for exploitation. He walked toward the door, the gang members following him in a loose circle. Night air hit him as soon as he stepped outside, the distant sky a tapestry of stars that contrasted the harsh fluorescent glare of the diner sign. Gravel crunched underfoot, and Barron's pulse quickened in anticipation. He took stock of the open space, few escape routes, no immediate bystanders, an SUV that might become a shield if needed. The tall man moved in front of Barron, arms folded over his chest, an air of smug confidence radiating from every pore. His companions fanned out, forming a semicircle that blocked Barron's path back to his vehicle. In the stillness, the chirping of distant crickets sounded unnaturally loud, like a soundtrack for an impending collision. "You know, out here," the tall man said, "we don't like strangers rolling in without paying respect. So how about you hand over your wallet and we call it even?" Barron's jaw tightened. He glanced briefly at his SUV, wondering if there was any chance of just driving off. But the position of the gang suggested that wasn't an option. The tension in the air thickened as each second passed. "I'd rather not," Barron said slowly, deliberately. "Maybe we can resolve this in a way that doesn't involve me losing my wallet." A short, derisive laugh came from one of the men to his left. Another spat on the ground. They were done with words, and Barron could sense the confrontation pivoting toward violence. For a flicker of a moment, he considered revealing his martial arts background, but he knew words of warning often fell on deaf ears in situations like this. Without another preamble, a wiry figure with a bandana around his neck lunged forward, attempting to grab Barron's arm. Barron pivoted swiftly, stepping back while sweeping the man's wrist aside. The move was so fluid, so practiced, that it took the aggressor by surprise. The man stumbled, eyes wide, clearly not expecting any real resistance. "Big mistake," the tall man growled. "You don't know who you're messing with." Barron's heart pounded. The diner's neon glow flickered, casting shifting shadows on the ground. He recalled every training session, every disciplined hour spent honing reflexes, strength, and technique. This was no controlled environment. This was raw, real, and potentially deadly. The gang members exchanged quick glances, their bravado flaring into something more dangerous. Barron recognized the shift. When fear meets aggression, escalation is inevitable. The man with the bandana recovered and circled around Barron, eyes narrowed. Another advanced from the left, his fists raised in a classic boxing stance. The tall leader hung back slightly, letting his crew wear Barron down first. Barron adjusted his posture, feet shoulder-width apart, knees slightly bent, a balanced stance ready to absorb or deliver blows. It started with a quick jab from the man on the left, aimed high. Barron ducked, simultaneously snapping a front kick into his attacker's shin. A yelp of pain tore through the night. The bandana-wearing man tried to tackle, arms wide, but Barron sidestepped, hooking an arm around the attacker's shoulder and using momentum to drive him off balance. The man stumbled forward, nearly colliding with another gang member. A chorus of curses erupted, the frustration of the gang apparent as they realized Barron was no ordinary mark. The tall leader scowled, stepping forward with a menacing glint in his eyes. Barron, adrenaline kicking his system into high gear, kept his breath steady. He refused to let panic or the rush of adrenaline undermine the discipline he'd spent years cultivating. "You'll pay for that," the leader hissed. Then he lunged, fists swinging in a brutal flurry. Barron blocked one punch, rolled away from another, and countered with a precise strike to the man's ribcage. A hiss of pain escaped the leader's lips, but he retaliated with a hard elbow aimed at Barron's head. Barron barely managed to deflect it, feeling the impact jar his arm. The ferocity of the altercation escalated, dust kicked up by shifting feet swirling in the harsh white glow of the diner sign. Two more gang members rushed in, one brandishing a makeshift club, a short length of metal pipe. Barron's breath grew heavier, his muscles tensing at the sight of a lethal weapon. Instinct roared inside him, forcing him to remain calm and measured. One attacker swung the pipe in a wide arc, hoping to catch Barron off guard. Barron dropped into a low stance, ducking under the strike. He countered with a sweeping kick that sent the attacker tumbling. The pipe clattered onto the gravel, and Barron scooped it up in one smooth motion, tossing it far out of reach. Yet the moment he straightened, another man rushed him from behind, arms locked around Barron's waist in an attempted takedown. Barron's training took over. He shifted his hips, breaking the hold by driving a hard backward elbow into the attacker's abdomen. The grip loosened, and Barron spun around, delivering a follow-up strike that sent the man staggering back. Exhaustion began to nip at the edges of Barron's focus. Martial arts demands both physical and mental endurance, and fending off multiple opponents tested both. The leader came at him again, a combination of punches that forced Barron to block desperately. One blow slipped through his defense, glancing off his shoulder and making him hiss in pain. The leader capitalized on it, aiming a swift kick at Barron's side. Barron twisted away, but not quite fast enough. The impact stung, though not enough to cripple him. He exhaled sharply and locked eyes with the leader. "You're tougher than you look," the leader sneered, wiping a trickle of blood from his lip. "But we've got numbers." Barron squared his stance, flexing his fists. "Numbers won't help if you can't land a hit," he said, though inside he knew this battle was far from over. A sudden hush swept over the scene, the gang momentarily regrouping as they realized Barron wasn't folding under pressure. Their circle tightened, eyes darting for any sign of weakness. Gravel crunched beneath boots, and the neon diner's glow flickered, casting restless shadows across faces etched with determination and desperation. Barron could taste the metallic tang of adrenaline on his tongue, his breath ragged but controlled. The leader gave a sharp nod to a lanky figure sporting a silver chain around his neck. "End this," he growled. The lanky one stepped forward, cracking his knuckles with theatrical menace, lips curled in a predatory grin. He lunged, arms outstretched in a grappling stance, clearly intending to subdue Barron with brute force. Barron stood his ground, letting the attacker close the distance. The man reached for him, biceps flexing, but Barron executed a swift redirect, sliding under the man's arm and hooking his leg for a takedown. The lanky attacker toppled forward, hitting the dirt with a muted thud. A burst of curses erupted from the circle as the rest watched their comrades sprawled at Barron's feet. Despite the advantage, Barron didn't press. He took one step back, scanning the group with a fierce but steady gaze. He noted the anger igniting in their eyes. They had come for easy prey and discovered something else entirely. Yet their pride kept them from fleeing. In that flickering moment, Barron remembered every lesson about controlling one's fear, harnessing adrenaline instead of being consumed by it. Another man rushed in, a hulking figure with a shaved head, fists clenched so tight the knuckles showed white. He swung a right hook. Barron ducked, but the attacker followed with a brutal uppercut that clipped Barron's jaw. Pain exploded in his head, momentarily staggering him. His vision blurred, but he forced himself to remain upright, stepping back to recalibrate. The attacker pressed forward, eager to capitalize on the opening. Barron swallowed hard, ignoring the metallic taste of blood on his lip. He blocked the next strike, countering with a precision punch that landed between the man's collarbone and shoulder. The attacker reeled, stumbling back. Barron inhaled. This was becoming a war of attrition. He wanted this to end before someone reached for a weapon more lethal than a pipe. His gaze flicked toward the small group near the diner entrance, patrons who dared to watch from a distance, paralyzed by either fear or shock. They were waiting to see if the stranger in the SUV would emerge victorious or be reduced to a victim. Barron felt a ripple of determination pulse through him. He couldn't allow these gang members to terrorize anyone else tonight. The tall leader, still nursing bruised ribs from Barron's earlier blow, snapped at his remaining men. "Don't just stand there, finish him!" The gang closed ranks, more cautious now, but their brutality was far from spent. 4 men advanced in unison, hoping to overwhelm Barron with sheer numbers. The nearest jabbed at him repeatedly, testing his defenses. Barron parried, stepping side to side as if engaged in a choreographed dance of survival. Suddenly, one swung a wild kick aimed at Barron's midsection. Barron caught the leg before it could land, using the attacker's momentum to fling him sideways into another gang member. Both crashed to the ground in a tangle of limbs and gravel spray. In that instant, a third man lunged with a growl, brandishing a folding knife that flashed under the neon sign. The blade's reflection stung Barron's eyes, but training compelled him to react. He sidestepped, trapped the attacker's wrist with both hands, and twisted, forcing a pained yelp from the knife wielder. The blade slipped free, skittering across the lot before coming to rest near a battered trash can. Chaos rippled through the circle as the watchers realized the situation teetered on the edge of lethal. The leader's eyes flared with frustrated rage. Barron had now disarmed and humiliated multiple members of his crew. Each attempt at intimidation met with unwavering resolve. The leader balled his fists, clearly preparing for a final onslaught. "Move!" he barked, gesturing for the men to flank Barron. 2 fanned out on either side, forcing Barron into a defensive pivot that left him with no simple exit. Yet Barron refused to let them box him in fully. At precisely the right moment, he feigned a motion toward one man, causing that attacker to raise his arms to strike. Swiftly, Barron spun toward the second man, striking with a rapid punch that connected with the side of his jaw. The man crumpled with a dull moan, shock plain on his face. The first attacker, still reacting to the feint, hesitated, just long enough for Barron to unleash a sidekick that landed squarely in the attacker's torso. He doubled over, stumbling to the ground. Sweat trickled down Barron's temples, his limbs burning with exertion. He'd neutralized several threats, but the looming presence of the leader remained. Distantly, Barron heard sirens. Perhaps someone inside the diner or a passing trucker had called the cops, or maybe it was just highway patrol cruising the roads. The leader heard it too, his scowl twisting in indignation and fear. If he didn't finish this soon, law enforcement might show up. And no local street gang leader wanted to be caught at a crime scene. With a guttural shout, the leader charged Barron, ignoring injuries that made his breathing ragged. He drove forward with a punishing series of strikes that tested every ounce of Barron's concentration. Barron deflected 2 blows but missed a third that hammered into his ribs, causing him to gasp. Pain flared, but he steadied himself, recentered his stance, and launched a counterstrike that smashed against the leader's forearm. A flash of anguish crossed the man's face, and Barron seized the moment, delivering a spinning hook kick that connected with the leader's side. The leader staggered, his breath erupting in a strangled curse. The air itself seemed to pause, as though the entire conflict hesitated in that heartbeat. The gang members, still conscious and on their feet, looked to their leader, uncertain whether to continue or cut their losses. The men on the ground groaned, nursing bruises and battered egos. The sound of sirens grew louder, no longer a faint wail, but an urgent cry that promised imminent arrival. Barron glanced over to see flickers of red and blue lights cresting the dark horizon. "Boss, we gotta go!" hissed one of the men, clutching his side. Fear snaked into his voice. The leader spat, wiping sweat from his jaw, eyes blazing with defiance. Slowly, though, sense won over. He pointed a trembling finger at Barron. "This isn't over," he snarled, the words echoing with wounded pride. "You'll regret crossing us." Barron watched as they rushed to collect their injured and scramble into the battered truck. The engine roared, tires spinning in a shower of dirt. Within seconds, the gang was gone, taillights vanishing into the Texan night as the first distant flash of police lights illuminated the highway. Adrenaline still coursed through Barron's veins, but relief coursed alongside it. He inhaled raggedly, forcing himself to stay upright despite the ache in his ribs and the sting on his jaw. A door squeaked behind him. The diner's manager, a stout middle-aged woman in an apron, stepped out cautiously. She looked at the scattered footprints, the overturned trash can, and the signs of a vicious fight. Her eyes flicked to Barron, who stood amidst the wreckage. "You all right, son?" she asked, voice trembling. Barron exhaled, nodding slowly. "I think so." He glanced at the approaching patrol car. The swirling lights splashed red and blue across the diner's weathered walls. 2 officers stepped out, hands hovering near their holsters, scanning the scene with alert intensity. Barron raised his arm slightly to show he wasn't a threat. The next few minutes blurred as the officers peppered him with questions, their expressions shifting from suspicion to astonishment when they recognized the name Barron Trump. The diner's manager corroborated his story, describing how the gang had followed him outside to shake him down. One of the patrons who'd witnessed the fight emerged, stammering about how Barron fought off multiple attackers with astonishing skill. Barron provided as many details as he could, wincing whenever a bruise reminded him of a blow he hadn't fully blocked. By the time the officers took statements and radioed for backup units to track down the fleeing gang, the diner's lights had started to flicker from tired wiring. The older couple from inside approached timidly, concern etched on their faces. "Thank you," whispered the woman. "They've been coming around, scaring folks. It's about time someone stood up to them." Barron managed a small smile, though the pain in his ribs dampened any real sense of triumph. "I just didn't want anyone getting hurt," he said, glancing at the broken glass and scattered gravel. The night air felt heavier now, filled with the static of potential aftermath. Whatever sense of peace he'd sought on the highway was gone, replaced by the gritty reality of conflict. The officers advised him to get checked out at a local clinic, offering an escort if needed. One officer even offered to call an ambulance, but Barron declined. He was sore, not severely injured, nothing a good night's rest and some ice packs wouldn't address. He thanked them, filled out a quick statement, then turned to the manager. "Sorry for the trouble." She shook her head, her apron dusty from stepping onto the lot. "You helped us, sweetheart. Trouble was already here." She patted Barron's arm gently as if reassuring herself he was real. "I got a first aid kit if you want." He nodded gratefully, following her back inside the diner. The interior felt strangely calm now, the quiet hum of the overhead lights steady and unyielding. She pulled out a small white box with bandages and antiseptic wipes. Barron cleaned a shallow cut on his arm, noticing the bruise forming on his jaw in the reflection of a napkin dispenser. As he dabbed at the dried blood, he thought about the gang's parting words. This isn't over. A quiet, uneasy sensation churned in his gut. He might have ended their shakedown tonight, but grudges in places like this could carry on. These men valued pride and territory. They wouldn't forget being bested. Barron's chest tightened at the notion of future reprisals. Yet he also felt a certain calm. He'd done what he had to do. Nobody else got hurt, and that was what mattered. He paid for his coffee and burger, leaving a generous tip for the shaken waitress. She gave him a shaky smile, seemingly relieved he was alive and well enough to leave on his own feet. As he stepped back outside, the night air had turned cooler, the echo of sirens now silent. The patrol car was gone, presumably to search for the gang. The older couple was still there, starting up their aging station wagon, offering Barron an encouraging wave before pulling onto the highway. Barron returned to his SUV. He paused before getting in, taking a long look at the dark stretch of road ahead. The starlight seemed to whisper caution, yet also freedom. He inhaled, shaking off the lingering weight of the fight. With a soft groan, he eased into the driver's seat, the faint overhead light illuminating the interior. He tested his sore shoulder, rotating it gently. Pain flared, but it was tolerable.